All right, so let's imagine this. You're prepping for this super important meeting about what a second Trump term could mean for the U.S. economy, and you've got like a mountain of reports, articles, all this stuff, but you need like the key takeaways,
Mhm.
right? And you need them fast. So think of this as your shortcut. We're going to dive into this article from the Epoch Times that really digs deep into how Trump's policies could impact like everything,
Yeah.
from energy prices to even how much your next car is going to cost you.
And jumping right in, one of the most interesting things is how the markets have reacted. The article mentions the S&P 500 jumped significantly right after the election.
Yeah, like a jump of over 2.5%.
Yeah.
That's got to be a clear signal, right?
It does seem like a positive outlook from businesses, but the why is what's interesting. The article gives a few possible reasons. Some analysts think businesses are expecting less regulation under Trump, which could lead to higher profits. Others think it's connected to Trump's focus on domestic manufacturing and resource production. He's been very vocal about reducing reliance on foreign supply chains.
Okay, so there's more to that market jump than we initially thought. It's not just like a quick reaction, but potentially a bet on some very specific policy changes. And speaking of policy changes, let's talk about deregulation. This article really breaks down how Trump's approach is different from the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's a big contrast. The article talks about how under Biden, 994 new regulations were introduced. That added like almost $1.7 trillion to business costs. But Trump's first term actually saw a reduction in regulatory costs. It saved businesses almost $100 billion.
Whoa, almost 1.7 trillion. That's a crazy number. What
Yeah.
does that even mean for like the average person? The article talks about fuel economy standards as an example.
Right. Under the Biden administration standards, new vehicles would have been around $3,400 more. But Trump wants to roll back those regulations, which could mean lower prices for pretty much everything.
So cheaper cars, possibly. I like the sound of that. But this article also goes into how Trump's policies could shake things up in the entire energy sector.
Yeah, definitely. The article says Trump's approach could be a total game changer for traditional energy industries like oil and gas. It says his policies could expand domestic production and even maybe bring energy prices down.
Wait, are we talking about going back to those $2 per gallon gas prices we had during Trump's first term? Because if so, I am here for it.
Well, the article kind of hints at that possibility, but, there's no guarantee. One thing it points out is that they have to convince oil companies to invest in new wells and refineries. After all the price swings and overinvestment, they might not be so eager to jump back in.
Good point. It's easy to get excited about cheaper gas, but it's obviously more complicated than that.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about renewable energy. The article mentions that solar company stocks dropped right after the election. What's going on there?
It seems like under a second Trump term, we might see a big rollback of federal support and regulations for wind and solar.
Mhm.
Trump has even said he'd stop offshore wind projects. So this move away from renewables is probably why investors got nervous. So is this good or bad for us in the end? On the one hand, less support for renewables could mean lower costs for now. But what about the long-term effects on clean energy? That's a tough one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the many questions this article brings up. We've only just started, and there's so much more to talk about, especially when it comes to taxes with the potential second Trump term.
Oh yeah, taxes, everyone's favorite topic. Not really, but they're important for sure. And this is where things could get interesting. The article mentions a possible battle over tax policy. Let's get into that.
So let's start with something you might remember from Trump's first term, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA. It's back, and there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, the TCJA, didn't that give a lot of people some nice tax breaks? What's happening with it now? Is it here to stay, or are we in for some big changes?
It's kind of both. The article says the corporate tax cuts, which lowered the rate from 35% to 21%, those are actually permanent. But the cuts to personal income tax rates, those are set to expire in 2025 unless they renew the TCJA.
So some people listening could end up paying more in taxes if that doesn't happen, right?
It's possible. And the article also talks about another possible tax change, tariff increases, specifically on stuff imported from China.
Oh, tariffs. Those are two words that can make any shopper nervous. We could be talking about higher prices on everything, clothes, electronics, all of it.
Exactly. The article suggests Trump might be thinking about tariffs as high as 60% on some Chinese imports. Now, this could be a way to boost domestic manufacturing, but it also risks making inflation worse and affecting how much things cost, and even if we can get them.
It's a tough situation. And this is something I found really surprising. The article says that both Trump and Kamala Harris have said they want to cut taxes on tips. At first, that sounds good for people who work in service. But is it really a good idea? Would that just make taxes even more confusing?
That's a great question, and the article talks about that exact point.
Yeah.
Targeted tax cuts sound good, but they can make the whole tax system more complex and even unfair. It's important to look at the bigger picture and make sure any changes actually benefit everyone, not just certain groups.
So we've got possible deregulation leading to lower prices on some things, maybe cheaper energy, but questions at investment in the energy sector and then this whole uncertain situation with taxes. Sounds like things could get wild.
They definitely could. And we haven't even talked about a potential clash with China on trade. The article says both Trump and Biden have been pretty tough when it comes to trade with China, so that's something else to watch closely.
For sure. Okay, quick recap. We've got a possible big change in energy, a back and forth on regulations, and a puzzle with taxes. It's a lot to take in, but this deep dive is just the beginning. What stands out to you so far? What are your first thoughts?
The complexity of it all is what gets me. There are so many moving parts. It's hard to say what will happen, but one thing's for sure. A second Trump term could change things a lot for the economy, both here and around the world.
And that's why this deep dive is so interesting. We're not just reading headlines, we're looking at the details and trying to understand what could happen. And there's still so much more to explore. We've only just scratched the surface of this topic. But for now, let's take a break and come back with fresh eyes to tackle the next part of this puzzle.
So, we were talking about China and trade before the break. The article also goes into this potential clash with China on trade. It says that both Trump and Biden have taken a really tough stance on trade with China. This hawkish approach is what they call it in the article. It's really shaped how these two big economies interact.
Okay, hawkish on trade. What does that even mean in normal terms? For someone who doesn't spend all day thinking about trade policy.
Basically, it means being really strong about it, putting what's good for the U.S. first and using things like tariffs and sanctions to get a better position in negotiations. The article talks about how both administrations have put tariffs on billions of dollars worth of stuff coming from China, and it seems like that might keep happening under a second Trump term.
Yes. So maybe even more tariffs. We talked about how that can make things more expensive for people. Well, what's the bigger picture here? Are there good things about this hawkish approach? Or is it all bad?
That's the question, isn't it? The article looks at both sides. So the people who like this approach say it's needed to protect American jobs and businesses from China doing stuff that's not fair. They also think it can force China to be more open with their markets and follow the rules everyone else follows.
So it's about making things fair.
Yeah, exactly. But then the people who don't like it say this aggressive approach could make things worse. They're worried it could start a trade war that hurts both countries and makes prices go up for everyone. And they say tariffs can hurt businesses here in the U.S. that need to buy things from China. It's complicated. There's no easy answer.
Sounds like you got to be really careful.
Yeah.
Let's go back to something we talked about before, the overall health of the U.S. economy. The article mentions both good and bad things that could happen with the second Trump term. What do you think will happen?
Hard to say for sure, but the article gives us some things to think about. The good side is, if Trump does what he says he'll do, like cutting government regulations and making more energy here in the U.S., it could make our economy stronger and more stable. Imagine businesses not having to deal with so many rules and having access to cheaper energy. That could really help things grow.
It does sound good, but you said there are risks too.
Right. The article says that if these policies aren't done right, they could cause problems you don't expect, like maybe more inequality between rich and poor people, damage to the environment, or even that trade war getting out of control. Those are all bad things that could happen.
It's like there's always more to the story than you see at first. And this deep dive has definitely shown us that. We've looked beyond just the headlines and talked about what could happen with a second Trump term. From deregulation to energy to trade with China, it's a lot to think about.
It is. It's about making us curious and making us think critically and asking those tough questions, because that's how we learn and become better citizens.
I agree with you. And, this deep dive has shown how important it is to look at things from different angles. We've heard from economists, analysts, and experts who all have different ideas about what a second Trump term could mean for the economy. It's good to hear all those different opinions when you're trying to understand these complicated issues.
It is. You can't get the whole picture from just one article or one expert. It's about putting all the pieces together, really thinking about the evidence, and then forming your own opinion.
Exactly. And sometimes you just have to accept that you don't know everything and that there's no easy answer and that economics and politics are messy.
You got it. And as we finish up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember that this is just the start. This is just a place to begin to look deeper into the sources, to see what other people are saying, and to keep asking questions and learning.
For sure. So what are you thinking about after hearing all this? What really stuck with you? What questions do you have now? Remember, this is just the beginning. Keep asking those questions, keep looking for answers, and keep thinking. Until next time, happy exploring. And that's what's so cool about these deep dives. It's all about giving you the tools to think for yourself, to become like a more informed citizen. We're not trying to tell you what to think, just give you what you need to figure it out on your own.
Exactly. And, as you're looking into this, more think about the long-term effects of these changes. Like how could they change the global economy? How will they affect things with other countries, especially China? Those are some big questions.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we were looking at all the details, but now we got to zoom out and see the whole picture, the global situation.
Exactly. And one more thing. The article mostly focuses on the economic stuff, right? But what about the social and environmental impacts? How could these changes affect things like income inequality, climate change, healthcare? All those things are connected too, and we should think about them.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the money stuff, but we can't forget about people and the planet. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, for sure.
It really has. I think the best part is how it makes you curious and encourages you to think critically and to come to your own conclusions.
Definitely. So what do you think? What was the most interesting part for you? What questions are you left with? Remember, this is just the beginning. Keep asking those questions, keep searching for answers, and keep those brains working. And that's it for this deep dive. But remember, this is just the start of your journey. Keep those questions coming. Keep learning and keep exploring. Until next time,